Welcome to Sports Talk Line's edition of The Last Dance coverage. We talk sports 24/7, 365. I'm here. I'm the man with no remorse. Nate Dowdy as your host, as usual, with my main man, Tom McAllister. Tom, how the hell are you, my friend?
Thanks for having me, Nate. I'm looking forward to The Last Dance with The Last Dance, and this time I have a dancing partner.
Ah, that's right. Takes two to tango, as we say. Anyway, one thing, I have no idea why they called this The Last Dance. I know Phil Jackson made reference to it and things of that nature, but I think a much more appropriate title for this entire thing was I Took It Personally. For the reason being, they have a bad guy in every episode, and Jordan, essentially the hero. And first and foremost, with this episode 9, they started off with another villain, Reggie Miller. Take us away, Tom.
You know, I think when I look at Reggie Miller, because I'm trying to remember the episode, I think Reggie kind of referenced it where, like, you know, they talk trash. And the first time I became familiar with Reggie Miller was when Jordan got suspended for fighting him in 1993. So that was the first time Reggie Miller came across my radar. And then he came out to have very memorable moments against a certain team that plays against Madison Square Garden, elevated his profile with his performances in the playoffs. But I'm trying to remember, Nate, I don't know if you remember this. Was there ever a time during the documentary where Jordan was like, Reggie Miller said something that pissed me off? Because he said that pretty much about everyone.
It was more reference to Reggie, because he at that time was saying, you know what, most players were scared of Michael. I wasn't. And then it made reference to them tangling up in the series. And to me, out of all the villains of different teams they seemed to skim over the Indiana Pacers the most. What do you think?
You know, I would have to disagree. I felt like they paid so much attention. They went in depth to 5 of those 7 games, which is something I don't think they did to some of those NBA final games. You know, they kind of just glanced over, all right, the Bulls won. They did a very good job in the previous episode of setting up that team and recognizing, if you followed the NBA in the late 90s, you recognized how good of a team the Pacers were. You know, they had that closer in Reggie Miller. Rick Smits was an all-star caliber player. You had the Davis brothers, who were just tough, physical guys who could bring in. You had Chris Mullin coming off the bench. You had Jalen Rose, one of the members of the Fab Five, who can give a lot of matchup problems. And, you know, the one thing with Miller, he wasn't afraid to take the big shot, and he made a lot of big shots. And I think they did a very good job of Reggie Miller when he goes into his mindset and explaining. I think this is one of the only game-winning plays they talked about where Michael was not with the ball, where he goes, yeah, you know, I had that game, you know, I was like going to put the pressure on the referee to make a call, and Reggie is running off the screen. He pushes off Jordan, he catches, and he drills the 3. And I think he brought up a good point. He's like, look at Larry Bird. And after Miller hit that shot, there was still 7-10 seconds left or whatever the time was. And Larry Bird was just stoically like, just no emotion. Like, you know, they still got, game's not over. How did you respond to that moment with Larry Bird just like not even celebrating a potential game-winning shot?
That's Larry Bird. He's been there, done that. He's played against guys who were capable of hitting the game-winning shot, and he more than knew Jordan was capable. He was capable of hitting a shot in 0.9 seconds, and he was almost right. I mean, he got, despite clutching, that shot almost went in.
Yeah, and I think they did a good job with talking with Reggie Miller, like seeing he's looking at the angle, he's like, oh my God, it's going to go in. And that would have totally crushed the Pacers right there. But I think the key thing was when they talked about the Charlotte Hornets series before, it was like they won 1 game, and they're like, great, we pissed off Michael, now we're done for. The Pacers really didn't have that. You know, they had enough confidence, like, you know, if things come down to it, we could win. Maybe with revisionist history, if they had home court, maybe that series would have ended up differently. And just imagine how Reggie Miller would be if he was the one that led his team to eliminate Michael Jordan from his last season.
Yeah, he'd actually might be considered the best basketball player in his family at that time. So anyway, moving on, let's say had the Indiana Pacers beaten them in Game 7. Let's talk a little bit about those Utah Jazz teams. Do you think Indiana knocks off Utah?
I think, both of those teams are constructed very differently. I think Utah had kind of had like the big three, for lack of a better term. They had John Stockton and Karl Malone, Hall of Fame duo, point guard, power forward. They have Jeff Hornacek, who is a shooter. Byron Russell, who apparently made the mistake of offending Michael Jordan, which isn't that hard to do.
No.
I don't think it is. And I think it's one of the things where, they might not be as strong in the middle. I think the Pacers, the Davis brothers against Karl Malone, I think would have been an interesting matchup. You also had Mark Jackson on those Pacer teams, another Hall of Famer. Rick Smits would have been a tough matchup. I think down to it, though, I think the Pacers definitely could have pulled off a win. It depends who has home court. I would have to think maybe Utah would have home court.
Yeah, the last season they would have had home court.
Yeah, so that's why I think Utah probably would have etched it out because, but you never know. Reggie Miller, he's like the home run hitter. He's on that team. You got a shot. He can go crazy from three.
Yeah, and that's probably kind of the similar way I would have viewed it too. But as you brought up before, Indiana was brought up so much more tough and physical, particularly the Davis brothers. I think they would have brought a completely different matchup to Karl Malone. And I thought Utah probably would have had to play a lot more small ball to be able to win, which they could have matched them. They had a more than worthy point guard, Mark Jackson, and they had a superior scorer on the edge, Reggie Miller.
I think on paper, the Pacers, were better.
Right.
Because I think they had more talent and they had more depth.
Yeah.
I just think the home court advantage, because Utah was so close to winning championships the season before. Usually sometimes when a team gets close and they make it back the next year, they're so motivated, they're so gung-ho, they remember that painful victory. Not unless you're going up against Michael Jordan. But I think it definitely would have been a 6-7 game series, and then also too, if you look at Larry Bird's legacy, some people say he might have been the greatest player of all time. He could also be up there with the greatest coach if he's the one who knocked out Michael Jordan and the infamous Chicago Bulls.
I mean, arguably, people use Phil Jackson as an argument as the greatest coach of all time, and that's a legitimately good argument. So, I mean, people often forget Larry Bird was coach of the year and had those Pacers teams in several title contending opportunities.
Yeah, and I think also, too, I believe Larry Bird was also executive of the year. So he was the only person to win NBA MVP, coach of the year, and executive of the year. But did you catch when Michael Jordan said goodbye to him after that Game 7?
Yeah.
How do you respond to that? That was something where I'm like, and that's his friends.
Yeah, well, I'm kind of the same way. I bust balls with my friends and shit like that. Excuse me, poop like that, YouTube. You didn't hear the S word. Anyway, yeah, I mean, that's just kind of the way he is. And what actually rubbed me the wrong way about Michael the most was the fact that he's a very passive-aggressive guy. Not even passive sometimes. He'd be kind of aggressive towards people he didn't even know. So it's not like you're busting balls with your friend and things of that nature. I mean, he was literally meeting people for the first time, and there'd always be some sort of a dig.
Yes.
You get that impression as well?
I definitely think so. He seems like someone where if you're, I felt like with Jordan, that's something that did come off, where he's always talking trash about people. Like he made the comment a few episodes about, UConn? Oh, UConn has a great women's team. And then the guy responded back, yeah, so does North Carolina. So I really think with Michael Jordan, it all depends if he considers you a peer. I think if he considers you a peer, he might try to totally and utterly crush you because that's the way he is. You're not competing against me, I'm defeating you. He said some things to Jerry Krause that if they were mentioned today, bullying, all that stuff, and Krause never really responded. He just walked away. And he was vilified for this, and the perspective and information could be debated. But let me ask you this question, Nate. Would you rather play with Michael Jordan or play against Michael Jordan?
I'd play against him. I mean, honestly, I am wired a way where I want to knock off the best. I don't want to be the guy who's riding on his coattails. To me, I would want that challenge every day of the week. And I'll be straight up honest. I do not like Michael Jordan as a person. And so that would fuel me as a competitor even more. And a dynamic I think is hilarious about Michael Jordan. He loved to talk trash, dig at people, but he really couldn't take it himself. No. And that was one thing that really, really struck me was we have a completely different lens at looking at Jordan because he brought us back to an era of basketball that was much more pure in a lot of people's eyes. But at the same time, if LeBron had the same thing or Kevin Durant, we'd call him sensitive. We call Jerry Krause and say he has an inferiority complex where Michael Jordan's just competitive. I mean, what do you have?
I think with Jordan, like the one thing, if you mention especially LeBron James or Kevin Durant, they're great basketball players.
Right.
But when you're comparing them to the legacy of Michael Jordan, Jordan never left his team. Right. Where he wasn't like, you know what, I can't beat the Pistons, I'm going to join them. He's like, no. I think the NBA was different back then. Anyone could have joined the Bulls and gotten that championship ring. But a lot of those players were like, I want to be the main guy to win a championship. So they kind of, that I think is the major difference.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
And like now, and some people wrote on Twitter, like, you have Michael Jordan who, put up with this and that. He didn't like his general manager, which was very well documented in this series. He would have some issues with X, Y, and Z or whatever, but he played through it. Now there are some people in high school where if they're not getting enough playing time in an AAU game, they switch teams later that afternoon. So Jordan would take adversity. Other players nowadays probably won't take up as much adversity. They'll try to look for maybe an easier way out, even though it could be understandable. But I just think Jordan, that was the golden era of the NBA, in my opinion.
I have to agree with the golden era, but at the same time, I think you were making the kind of similar point. The difference between the two eras is how they handled the adversity. Whereas a lot of people probably would have taken criticism and sulked and claimed the victim, whereas Michael Jordan had that motivate him. So I think that's the biggest difference. Even though he's very, very sensitive, clearly, he took it motivated instead of being defeatist. At the same time, contracts were usually signed to much later dates back in Jordan's era, so the opportunity to leave via free agency wasn't as prevalent as it is now. Had he came up in the league, had the league been built similarly in the late 80s, early 90s, I don't know. You could possibly see Michael Jordan jump ship. Maybe not. I think that's the thing. The dynamic of the league's changed so much via free agency.
Yeah, I'm saying it does hurt their legacy, but it's understandable because if you can make the same amount of money anywhere you play, okay, if you can offer me the same amount of money as this team, I'm going to go with the team that gives me the better opportunity to win. And I think it was too, I think they had the Larry Bird rule where Michael Jordan would make, I think in the second time he came back, he'd make about $30 million a year for each season, and he'd keep on coming back and back. So that would kind of set the bar for everyone, to say the least. It's also with the league construction, would people join Jordan or would Jordan join other people?
Yeah, and I think Jordan had an advantage because Chicago is a major market. Maybe the Bulls weren't a major team when he started, but it is different than being in Cleveland. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, it is bigger than Cleveland, a team that Michael Jordan has crushed so many times.
Right.
And is also too. Now, let me ask you this question, because this is kind of, they kind of talked about the Bulls breakup. And, everyone was vilified about Jerry Krause. How do you respond to Reinsdorf calling up Phil Jackson, be like, hey, do you want to give it another try? Do you think Jerry Reinsdorf could have done more to keep the dynasty intact?
Yes. I mean, even Jordan himself alludes to it toward the end of the episode. He basically says, had you offered Scotty a 1-year contract with a lot more pay, you probably could have gotten me back with Phil Jackson more. And what was most prevalent through the entire series to me, if we're talking about winners and losers, I think Phil Jackson is the biggest winner here. He was the glue that kept all those personalities together. There's no way in hell they win 6 championships without him. What do you think?
I totally agree. When you have someone like Michael, the players attached themselves to Michael Jordan's cape, but Phil Jackson was able to ring in Michael Jordan, which is something, and not just Michael Jordan, but Dennis Rodman, and he knew exactly how to handle those big egos. I think, just imagine if you were head coach of the Chicago Bulls replacing Phil Jackson and Michael Jordan is still on that team. That would be a daunting task. And I think he is one winner that I think comes up in this. My opinion of, I'm like, well, he's in the right place at the right time. But my respect grew for him immensely, right. Where you're winning X amount of championships when your general manager hates you for whatever reason, or there's distrust. Your best player loves you and is like, I'm only playing for one. If the best basketball player ever says, I'm only playing for that coach, that means a lot to you. But now, who do you think was a winner or a loser? Should we talk about winners? Let's talk about some winners. Who else do you think is a winner, Nate?
Gosh, I think probably after the last episode, Steve Kerr, his reputation went up big time. They obviously drew the parallel and dynamics between his father being murdered along with Jordan's. And so they kind of link him up there. And then they kind of showed you he served a valuable piece of that team kind of toward the end of their playoff run.
I think another winner who came up more towards the later episodes, I think it's Scott Burrell, because, they have someone where, Jordan is trying to ride him. And, Burrell kind of gives it back to him. Like, he didn't back down enough, but he also didn't go up in a corner and cry himself to sleep. But getting back to Steve Kerr, I think they did a very good job documenting him and explaining it, because I remember Steve Kerr from his time with the Chicago Bulls, but he was one of the guys too. He only got one offer coming out of high school. He went to Arizona. His father got murdered basically for being an American overseas. And it goes to show something the tragedy he has dealt with and the way he has handled himself. And also Steve Kerr, he could maybe be in the running. How many championships has he won as a player and a coach? He has, at least. The golden touch, to say the least. So that's kind of something that sticks out too. Do you got any more winners on your side, Nate?
Gosh, the big one was obviously Phil Jackson to me. How about you? Do you have another real winner?
One that I came off as a winner just because of the access he had was Ahmad Rashad. Because here he is, I remember Ahmad Rashad from hosting NBA Inside Stuff.
Right.
And you kind of never really know the relationships people have with the players. But this documentary showed it. If Michael Jordan had to say anything, he would go to Ahmad Rashad and be like, hey, he had that one interview in '93 where Jordan's in a dark room interviewing with dark sunglasses, where that interview didn't age well. But just Ahmad Rashad just being in there and driving in Jordan's sports car, going out to the game and stuff like that, shows how much of a confidant he was to Michael Jordan, which is something that I didn't really realize. He'd always say, oh, my main man's Michael Jordan. Of course you're going to say that. You're an NBA journalist. It shows how good he was. But Nate, now let's flip to the other side. Who do you think is one of the biggest losers in this documentary?
Well, to go back to the point about Ahmad Rashad, I think most people forgot he was a really accomplished NFL football player. I mean, he's in one of the greatest Vikings of all time, even before he started his great career in basketball journalism. So he's had just a wonderful career in sports. But going back to the losers, I mean, I think everyone is going to point out Jerry Krause. I mean, that's low-hanging fruit. I'm going to go Scottie Pippen. Scottie Pippen, I think, I've seen media reports where he's had a real issue with the way he was portrayed in the documentary. But if you take the totality of the documentary, you have to look at a lot of controversies. You have to look at migraine game. You have to look at the sitting on the bench when Kukoc was getting the final shot. You have to look at his back flaring up. You have to look at the way he treated Jerry Krause, the way the timing of his surgery that missed a lot of the beginning of his final season in Chicago. So he's a massive loser in my mind. How about with you?
Yeah, I definitely think Scottie Pippen is one of the players that his legacy was hurt by this, because the first thing that stands out, which, they mentioned in the documentary, was him sitting out when the team needed him and Tony Kukoc hit that shot. That's something that hurt Scottie Pippen's legacy. And also there were certain things that I forgot. Like, I didn't know he delayed his surgery. So he's like, you know what? I'm going to heal up on company time. Yeah. I'm not going to mess up my summer. So that's kind of something where it's like, granted, supposedly he signed a very bad deal. And supposedly ownership told him that. But it's also, it's kind of can you really feel bad for him? And because he was always up for trades. He always wanted more money, and ownership didn't give it to him. But I think another person who comes up bad is Jerry Reinsdorf, okay? Because he is the owner of the team. Jerry Krause works for you. There could have been things where you're like, you know what? We're going for this. Krause, okay, he's been the villain of this, but Reinsdorf's the owner. If he really wanted to, he'd be like, you know what? This is what we're doing. So how do you feel about Jerry Reinsdorf?
Yeah, Jerry Reinsdorf, I have to agree 100%. I mean, he did not do much to smooth tensions over with the team. And one of the telling things of the documentary is time after time, you see these guys having to deal with so much drama in the organization. And I think that was a reflection of the ownership. There's no way, at least there is that amount of drama without it starting from the top. And as we say, poop rolls downhill, right?
That is true. And it's also, Reinsdorf could have easily, if he paid Scottie Pippen, a lot of those problems probably would be taken away. But he decided not to, because he's like, nope, I don't renegotiate contracts. And you can also say it was also bad management when you have so many of your players, their deals are done at the end of a year. So you're going to have to go into rebuild anyway. Do you think anyone else came out as losers in this documentary, Nate?
Gosh, it's tough. I almost wanted to say, well, actually, Isaiah Thomas for sure. Isaiah Thomas definitely comes off like a loser, particularly with his response even almost 30 years later with not shaking hands, and his justification for it in this series makes him look very bad in my opinion.
I like how you brought up Isaiah Thomas, because I think one of the points they tried to make in this documentary was after the series, the opposing team would come and shake your hand and say, congratulations.
Yeah.
They showed that earlier with Michael Jordan shaking the hands of the Detroit Pistons after those series. They showed Karl Malone going on the bus after Game 6, congratulating everyone, especially Michael Jordan. So I think that was thrown in there to be like, listen, this is how NBA players handle themselves. It's not what the Celtics did to the Pistons, it's what the Pistons did to Jordan. So, but, I think there's probably, what do you got, Nate?
I got another winner for you, and I can't believe I completely forgot about this one, was Dennis freaking Rodman. I mean, he juggled both of his lives so well in between the basketball, his partying outside of basketball. I mean, to be able to finagle a 48-hour period where you could just go and party your butt off is nothing short of amazing. And on top of it, his final year, he goes and he joins the NWO. And he's just there chilling. Yeah, he got fined for it. He got fined maybe 20, 30 grand. But what did he end up making by showing up? About $250,000 for that appearance. So that's a massive winner in my book.
And also to add on, if you look at Dennis Rodman, okay, what is he doing? He's winning championships with the Chicago Bulls. He's main eventing wrestling pay-per-views with Hulk Hogan. and he's dating / married to Carmen Electra. If that is not what any adolescent male wanted during 1998, I don't know what else. But
exactly. And, he was building his brand while winning championships. I mean, I don't know if another player really, excluding Michael Jordan, really built a brand better than Dennis Rodman during that period.
I don't think Rodman built a brand. I think he built controversy. Where he was someone where wherever he went, the media would follow. He wasn't like, when I think of brand, I think of merchandise, and Jordan's A1 ahead of Rodman when it comes to merchandise. But I think, he similar to Mike Tyson, Dennis Rodman kind of had that, like, all right, he's prone to do something crazy. Like, you watch him to see him lose his mind. That's how he built himself up, to that media attention. But I think going to a loser, one of the big time losers in this one, Utah Pizza.
Oh, yeah.
It came out that it wasn't the flu game, it was the food poisoning game. And, they're calling Utah at like 10:30 at night trying to get pizza. 5 people come over, and Michael Jordan eats the whole pizza. What do you expect is going to happen? Of course he's not going to feel that. So,
go ahead.
How do you respond to that?
Yeah, well, then again, Utah is not necessarily known for their fine ethnic cuisine. One part of that. And also it's, he took the risk and it bit him in the ass. Well, it didn't bite Michael in the ass, but it bit Utah.
Yeah.
And it is kind of funny because does that put a different spin on it for you? Because one is the flu, whereas the other is usually lasts for about 24 hours in food poisoning. Does that change anything for you?
I remember one time during the Sacramento series, Kobe Bryant said he ordered room service, and the hamburger he ordered gave him food poisoning. So it kind of goes into this too, but I'm like, you eat a whole pizza by yourself? That's kind of something where it's like, yeah, you might be a little bit more than hungry. Like something doesn't seem right. And does it change? He still had a great performance, whether he was healthy or not.
Right.
Might have added a little bit more drama to it, but I felt like it maybe provided closure for that situation. Be like, oh, it was just, food poisoning. So.
Yeah, but we talk about conspiracies. Imagine the conspiracy had Utah hung on and won that game with Jordan with food poisoning. Now we have a completely different context. Now we kind of dismiss it just because, well, we know Michael hits the game-winning shot and then puts the dagger in Utah.
Maybe he didn't like the pizza and he was mad at the pizza and he had to, crush the pizza by, having a phenomenal game.
I took it personally. That should have been the name of the show. I mean, you can't convince me otherwise. I took it personally.
He did, and I think Michael Jordan did take a lot of things personally, and I think that's kind of something a lot of people's perspective would go into. Is it did open up and it gave a lot of light on Michael Jordan. He's running this documentary, and some people are maybe seeing some of his less admirable characteristics.
Yeah, in speaking of the totality of everything, what was your opinion of Michael Jordan during that period, and has it changed now?
I think, he's someone who, you would find any way to motivate yourself. And I think it did take a hit because there were certain things where I'm like, his mindset, like his work ethic is phenomenal. I'm not going to question that. But how he found ways to motivate himself were a little eye-opening. And I think it hurts. It kind of hurts him. And like, his teammates kind of came across like he was very difficult to play with, because he was someone that always do this and that. And, so I do think there were some challenges to being in the life of Michael Jordan, especially if you were a teammate, where anything less than a championship is a complete failure. So I think that kind of opened up a lot of people's eyes going forward, like especially my eyes, where I thought he was great. He kind of seemed squeaky clean. A lot of people forgot about the gambling issue for the second three-peat run, but it just some seems off. Where I feel like for the burden of being the best athlete at your sport, you gave up being beloved by everyone.
Yeah, and here's the thing with me. I was much different than you. I grew up not liking Michael Jordan. I rooted against him vehemently. I wanted him to lose everything. And I respected him, though, because I was aware of his dedication to his craft and the way he willed himself to win. All of that I admire. And I actually admired his authenticity through everything. He didn't apologize for who he was during this whole thing, and I thought that was telling, and I thought that was cool. However, I still don't like Michael Jordan, and the big reason why is we see snippets of him taking things personally to motivate himself. But what I got through this was a lot of extreme competitors have that mindset, but they can shut it off in their personal life. I didn't get the impression Michael Jordan could do that. I thought he viewed life as a bunch of different petty competitions. And you saw that with the way he'd gamble with security. You saw that. So that's where he really loses me as a person. I think he's genuinely a petty person.
I think, another word we can use is controlling.
Yeah.
Because something that pops out is, okay, he's talking with Ahmad Rashad, who we mentioned before, and he goes to Ahmad Rashad, don't talk to Scott Burrell. This was game 7 against the Pacers. So, he's also going to management like, listen, I'm only playing for this coach. So he did try to, which you got to understand, he was the superstar. He was the engine,
right?
That was driving him. But he did also come across as controlling in this series.
Yeah, and honestly, that makes him a lot less palatable as a person. Whereas where we were sold in the 90s that he was squeaky clean and Mr. Smiley and Sunshine Michael on your McDonald's commercials. So that really had me taken aback. Whereas I think other competitors that are fierce in their field, not easy to deal with, I think can shut it off in their personal life. I didn't get that impression.
Well, I think also too, they very rarely went into his personal life at this time.
Right.
They brought up, his father's passing. They focused a lot on his father. They didn't focus on his children until the last few episodes. So that kind of makes you wonder a little bit too, like, weren't you doing anything else? Like, weren't you doing anything outside of sports? They talked to his trainer, like everything was like, for the most part, basketball related. When he went to make a movie, they focused a little bit on the movie, but mostly on the pickup games that happened. So that was kind of something like, all right, a little eye-opening too.
Yeah, and I thought it was really eye-opening that he didn't have his kids until the last 2 episodes. To me, I'm not going to pretend what it was like in the Jordan home, but from my viewing experience, it very much makes him look like an absentee father.
I mean, with that though, too, could you make that argument for any professional athlete?
No.
Who is away? I believe his family lived in Chicago during this time.
Mm-hmm.
So he at least was there some of the times. But that's kind of something too. You could almost say you can put any professional athlete in that category if they have children. Where, if they're out on the road for 41 or 82 games or something like that. He wasn't here for this, so that kind of is something where Jordan wouldn't be in that category alone, but they do show the kids sometimes popping up at games and stuff like that, but it doesn't go into their home life.
Right. And I guess the difference is that you saw more recently with someone like Kobe Bryant, who has a very similar personality to Michael Jordan, seemed to be, at least in front of the camera and everything, much more involved with his kids and their other players. But at the same time, again, I need to put the label that I'm not going to pretend I know what was going on, but maybe that was a necessary sacrifice he felt to be great.
Yeah, and I think, it was kind of, during that era, it was more okay. It was more acceptable, I think, to be like, hey, I got to work when I'm home with my kids, I'm home, but I also do got to work X amount of nights and all that. So I think in that situation, with Kobe too, they focused a lot after he retired.
Right.
So it doesn't explain, how Kobe was when he was still playing. So maybe, they kind of just cut it off like, all right, they win the championship, they had the victory parade and kind of fade to black. They never really got into like the deconstruction of the Bulls or, you know, how Jordan was with his family, because he eventually came back again.
Yeah.
So that is kind of something too, where it's like, I guess the family didn't miss him that much.
Yeah. And so that's another part of it, is we didn't see his ex-wife or even his current wife on any of it. And if I would have liked to have heard from his ex-wife, because no one was having to deal with that direct family conflict and everything than his ex-wife during that period. She went through all that. She went through the dying of his father. She went through raising of his kids. She went through kind of the baseball career. She went through all that, and we don't get to hear from her. So I thought that was a bit of a head scratch.
Well, so do they even mention her name? I don't think they do. No. So that's a little telling too.
Yeah. So I thought you talked about control earlier. I thought that was another area where I think Michael flexed his muscles in production.
Yes. You know, I totally agree with that. He's probably like, nope, we're not talking to her.
Yeah. I think and this was years ago. So if memory serves me correct, I think she did cut off the marriage because he was cheating, and she caught him in bed with 2 other girls. So bless Jordan's heart for that. But, you know, I don't think the marriage ended well. No. And so he was quite keen on leaving her out.
Yeah, I think that was it. And we can infer on basically, if you cross Michael Jordan, how he reacts to you.
Right. And so, you know, he's going to go scorched earth on you. He's going to cut your throat. I mean, so I remember when this whole thing came out, Michael, I say Michael like I know the freaking guy, but I'm going to use it for this case. He was quite concerned about his image after this and how he was viewed. And I was quite struck by the fact that he thought this, because I thought the documentary did as close to as a perfect of a job is to make him look good.
I think they do bring up certain things with his characteristics. They do go into the gambling part.
Right.
There's like, you know, and you know, they do bring up those cases and stuff like that. And he did testify, I lost X amount of dollars. It does kind of show him gambling. And, you know, they talk to his teammates where it's like, hey, listen, you know, he was, you know, a bully. And Jordan admits to the thing that I think saves Jordan for the most part is, you know, he says, I don't have a gambling problem. I have a competition problem. Yeah, I don't think that copied off well, but he admits what people would think are his faults. So right. I think that gets him pretty far. But I think with his image, you know, it's like player-wise, he was phenomenal. But it's like, listen, you know, like buyer beware. You know, you want Michael Jordan on your team, but if you're not up to snuff, he's going to drive you nuts.
Right. And I think he gets away with quite a bit in the documentary, for the reason being, I think he represents the golden era of basketball. And so a lot of people make a lot of exceptions on his behalf.
Yeah, he's good enough where, you know, you can overlook certain things.
Right.
You know, it's kind of like you're trying to tell me if Bill Wennington showed up to WCW Monday Nitro and missed practice, that he wouldn't have, you know, been like, no, what, you're done. Or if it was someone like, I don't know, maybe, God forbid, Scott Burrell did that. Yeah. You'd probably have Michael Jordan show up halfway through the event and start pulling out his ear to bring him to practice.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, it's, and the same thing with kind of Rodman. I mean, I don't think with the amount of information we have nowadays that any player could ever get by with that really again without absolutely being tarred and feathered.
Yeah, I think, you know, you mentioned a key point. You know, Jordan did not grow up or he did not play during the social media era. Or just imagine if you tweet something negative about Michael Jordan, could you see him be like, all right, so who said that about me? What's his name? You know, Knicks fan 3275. All right, I'm gonna have 300,000 or something ridiculous like that. You know, well, like you just use that as motivation to fuel him.
Well, imagine if he actually turned into a massive internet troll, like and vice versa. Like he like goes and takes that like particular Indiana fan 101 kind of a thing and just like completely photoshops pictures of that person and just rips on them and just posts all these like ridiculous memes. I mean, that's what I would have rather seen. And I thought that would have been 10 times more hilarious, even though I don't think that's the way he would operate.
He'd have someone else maybe do it.
Yeah.
He'd get a burner account and have someone to do. But I definitely think that would be something that would motivate him.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't take much to motivate him. And I think he could easily be a guy. He never wants to see him sweat. So he's not going to be the guy cursing out fans on Twitter or anything like that. He's the guy who's secretly simmering and in a rage when no one else can see it. So I think that's kind of the difference between someone like him and Durant, whereas we know you're getting under Durant's skin. Where Jordan kept that secret, even though he's boiling hot mad.
Yeah, well, I think it's also too, I think Jordan could, tunnel that anger or, channel that anger and him making better. Other players couldn't.
Yeah.
So that was kind of something too that was interesting. And it's just also just any little slight would just boom, that's it. I have to crush you. And it wouldn't even have to be anything that you said. It could be someone liked you, so he needed to eviscerate you.
Right. It could have been because you're the new free agent in his competition. It could have been, you were drafted higher than he was, and you got more votes in the All-Star game or anything.
I think one thing was like you got the MVP and I didn't.
Yeah. No, that was something he took it personally against Karl Malone because he won that MVP in the 97-98 season. Or no, it was 96-97, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think 96-97 he won it.
Yeah, 96-97, and Jordan won 97-98, right?
Yep.
So, I mean, even then, use that for fuel. And we take a look at a lot of the people he beat through this series. And what I like, we are kind of dismissive of a lot of people are dismissive of the teams that he beat because they didn't have the accolades of championships outside of Detroit. But had Jordan stayed retired after his original 3 years, I think you can possibly look at, a lot of future champions that he knocked off.
Yeah, I think, you'd probably have to say maybe the Orlando Magic, so that would be Shaquille O'Neal and Anthony Hardaway, maybe win in 96. Or the
do you think they beat the Pacers?
Well, I think I'm trying to think who they go. They beat the Pacers the year before, and I think Orlando would go through. I think they would probably beat Seattle too.
I think they beat Seattle for sure.
I think I could see Utah winning in 97 and maybe 98.
Yeah, but even then take a look at, let's say Utah wins one of those seasons. I mean, the images of John Stockton and Karl Malone go up tenfold, even with that one ring. I mean, that gives them so much more validation. And also, let's say Indiana takes one of those series. I mean, gives a lot more clout to Reggie Miller. And,
absolutely. Because that's the one, you got to look at off the top of my head. You can say Patrick Ewing, Charles Barkley, Reggie Miller, John Stockton, Karl Malone. Those are 5 guys, 5 Hall of Famers, 5 Dream Teamers that don't have championships because of Michael Jordan. David Robinson didn't win his titles till after Jordan retired.
Right.
So those are certain things to keep in mind too.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the interesting thing is because a lot of people don't realize he knocked off more 60-plus teams than anybody ever.
Yes.
It's just they don't have the titles to back it up.
Because of him.
Yeah, because of him. So that's my lasting impression. Did you have anything you wanted to add before we sign off?
I think with this too, it was definitely eye-opening. It's something where you got to wonder what they do next. And I think it definitely changed the perspective people had of Michael Jordan.
Yeah, I've seen a little bit of both. I've seen a lot of people kind of justify that behavior and that's fine if you do, but they are using a lot of double standards to that they wouldn't place on a lot of our current athletes. So I thought that was interesting. And listen, it's probably the best sports documentary I've watched in some time.
Yeah, I think this is probably one of the best sports documentary. It is difficult because the league has changed in the last 20 years since Jordan played in '98. So it is difficult to compare errors, but still, I think, the one thing that separates Michael Jordan from everyone else, even his peers knew he was the best in the world. And that's kind of something no one else can step to.
Right. Do you think he's the best player of all time?
Yes.
Yeah, I'd have to go similar direction. I mean, if he's not the best overall, he's definitely the best. He's the best wing of all time.
Yeah, to answer the question, in their prime, you need to win a game. Who do you want to shoot the final shot? It's Michael Jordan. It's
Right.
just, without a doubt, that's the guy I want. He lives for that moment, and he'll make the right play.
Yeah, and I think he's probably one of the most versatile scorers of all time. I mean, he did stuff. He had an unbelievable mid-range game, which I think is completely lost on today's game.
Yeah.
Well, Tom, tell us where we could go ahead and find you and follow you on Twitter.
All right. You can follow me on Twitter at defense_com, at DFENDS_com. Great talking with you, Nate.
Absolutely. Wish we could do this another few episodes. But that's all she wrote. Anyway, you could follow me at No Remorse Sports. No spaces, no apostrophes, no nothing. Just No Remorse Sports. Come join the millions and millions. Anyway, starting next Monday, I'm going to be doing a show of my own that's called No Remorse Sports. This one has spaces in it, so go check it out. I'm going to be doing it at 3 p.m. live, and go check it out anytime you want. Anyways, I'm going to sign off with the Steven Vanover impression, just like I always like to do. Lesson like a play, with intensity. Can I scratch my balls, Lee?